As Karen said, my name is Ciara Cummins and I'm coming from the Central Statistics Office in Ireland. So as Karen mentioned, I will be touching on our journey of our proven metadata, predominantly, I suppose, in the area of data collection and survey design in the CSO. So just to give it a small bit of background, the Central Statistics Office, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is Ireland's National Statistical Institute. And our purpose is to collect and analyse and disseminate statistics about Ireland's people, society, and economy. So I suppose from our perspective, we're responsible for the full journey or life cycle of a statistical product, from designing, building, and collecting the information right through to, I suppose, processing and disseminating the end statistics at the end of the life cycle. In terms of myself, then I'm a statistician working in the quality division within the CSO, and responsible for managing and governing the use of classifications and partial amount of metadata in the Central Statistics Office. So just give a quick overview of my presentation today, then I was going to include a very quick background, I suppose, into our data collection and survey design process before, and then just move on to our transition, I suppose, and journey to a more systematic approach to survey design, and I suppose our motivation behind changing. And I hope then just give a quick demo of our Collectica portal if the internet prevails. And finally, then I'll just wrap up some of the challenges that we encountered and future aims for our metadata journey going forward. So just as a quick background, I suppose, into our data collection survey design process before now. So in terms of, I suppose, previously our subject matter experts had the responsibility of designing and compiling questionnaires for their own statistical products. So some subject matter experts, I suppose, in this case, are essentially the statisticians who are responsible for the statistical product and publishing the statistics. So for example, a statistician working on the labour force survey or survey on income and living conditions known as SILC. And essentially then these statisticians applied their own knowledge into the survey design and produced questionnaire specs for our IT team to develop. So our methods of kind of collecting the information in terms of Blaze, which is something you might be familiar with, for the compilation of, say, tablets going to door for survey collection, and EQ then, which is our electronic questionnaire platform. So essentially then with this kind of method, I suppose, although there was kind of a lot of advantages of designing surveys in this way, in the sense that the statistician had kind of full control over the entire survey process, there was kind of, I suppose, a few disadvantages of designing surveys in this way. Some of them then being kind of just inconsistent survey design. So there was no real kind of standard blocks or linkage across surveys, in the sense that I suppose a lot of, when you're depending on personnel and people doing things in different ways, there was kind of different ways of doing things, obviously, so there was no kind of central way of designing surveys as such. And with that, then there was no kind of standard blocks of questions. You know, people may have an opinion of asking things in different ways, and I suppose being in control of the full life cycle, you don't have much time for testing of a questionnaire and actually trying to get to the nitty gritty of what questions work and don't work and what's of good quality and so on. There was kind of then poor documentation across the statistical process. Again, things being done in silos and not kind of being synced to any database or any central repository. One of the key things, there was no final version really of what went out in the field. So if the change in personnel or people moving from sections, it was kind of difficult to determine, okay, what was the final survey that actually went out, as you have like multiple, say, Word documents maybe saved, or in some cases not being saved. It was kind of difficult then to identify what questions worked. It was quite error prone. There was no traceability or revisions or version controls. And then, so kind of no traceability or revisions on terms of what changed over time, and having quite a history of that. And then there was just inconsistent survey specs provided to our field staff, which I suppose kind of hyped concern for them, and then our IT team who was developing the surveys, which kind of made a lot of things more kind of time consuming overall. I suppose then that kind of led to a motivation around changing the approach. So some of our aims then was try to utilize the DDI standard, and we've done this then through utilizing, I suppose, the Collectica products as being the kind of off-the-shelf solution to achieve some of these motivations. So one of the key things for us was to develop a central repository for standard and reusable questions. It allowed kind of a platform for everyone that was involved in the process. As you can imagine, I suppose there is different stakeholders in terms of the data collection side of things and the processes. And for one survey, you might have different sections involved. So any kind of platform to allow people to actually see what stage the questionnaire design was at, what questions were actually being used, where their variables being collected, as well as one of the essential things was start to standardize content and to improve the metadata across the surveys. So trying to get people to actually start asking things in the same way where possible. So for example, questions around name, that we don't just suppose ask what is your name in one survey, can I ask your name in another survey, and actually trying to think of the best way of asking it and then using that across all other surveys, again to improve quality and reduce time. To improve survey documentation reporting, and then just to reduce obviously workload and burden, um, while improving the quality of what we do. So then I suppose with the new kind of approach, I suppose there was kind of the establishment, and as we were utilizing the DDI standard, there was establishment of a questionnaire design unit, and essentially then they will be responsible for solely designing the questionnaire in conjunction with the subject matter expert, and that kind of enables us then to have proper like testing over questions and to send over kind of what works, and based on that, then in terms of that new approach, then we started kind of bringing in the DDI standard and trying to utilize that for survey specifications and design, again through the use of Collectica to enable us to use this standard. So I suppose just quickly kind of looking at the new kind of questionnaire development process then that has kind of been in place since early kind of 2018. Essentially it's kind of based on the GSPPM model then, right from kind of specify needs, design and build through to kind of the collect and disseminate. So I suppose there's quite one or two acronyms in that, but the QTU is essentially the questionnaire design unit, and the subject matter expert would be your SMEs. So moving from the transition then of the statisticians going from, I suppose, designing their own surveys to now providing variables and concepts to our questionnaire design unit. They agree the survey requirements and specifications at the specify needs stage. So this can be done through kind of a kickoff meeting at the start. And then the design and build and the questionnaire design unit will develop the survey using questionnaires, obviously utilizing DDI on that. And then the questionnaire design unit can, I suppose, utilize the Blaze code that was produced by Collectica functionality, and they will, I suppose, being kind of iterative processes that will kind of go over and back with the questionnaire design unit and IT to ensure that, I suppose, you know, the variables are being met, and the concepts that they want collected are included in the survey. But it kind of just gives a lot of control over standardization and the quality of the questionnaire, that, you know, items are being reused and they're tested questions as such. And I suppose then it kind of goes through the collect and the process stage with it coming back into SQL tables after being collected on the field. And then I suppose some of the work that we've been doing, but I suppose haven't advanced as such really, is bringing all that data back into Collectica then, to really, I suppose, look at the quality of the questions that are asked and to enable us to do that kind of data discovery element of metadata, and really kind of testing the quality of what is collected. And then at the value stage, then we have kind of a final version of what the survey was. And that can be, I suppose, determined, can be captured there on a repository and accessible for anyone who needs it. And we're seeing, I suppose, that the main benefits of that, as we're going through iterations of surveys, that it's very easy to see what was asked before, what worked, what was used in other surveys, and if there was any changes, I suppose, what was the rationale and the reasoning, I suppose, of any changes that occurred. So this stage, I suppose, will just give a kind of a quick demo of our Collectica portal, I suppose, and some of the work that has been done on that. So I suppose for those of you that are not familiar with Collectica, this is kind of the Collectica portal, I suppose, that's just kind of the interface of the repository, the back end of all the content. So for the moment, this is our internal portal, which basically is a combination of kind of our testing data, the surveys, I suppose, are in development, as well as the kind of final data. It's kind of a mix of everything, really. So I suppose for those that are kind of familiar, I suppose, with the terms of series and studies, we have our instruments, data files, questions, and variables. So I suppose in our sense, with the Statistical Institute, kind of our series relates back to kind of the statistical section that is responsible, I suppose, for the studies. So, for example, income, consumption, and wealth, and then the studies that have the repeated production activities inside that. We have our 140 instruments that we have on the repository at the minute, which is increasing over constantly, I suppose. And then we have our data files that just include some kind of aggregate summaries on some of the surveys that have been collected. As you can see, then we're moving on with the production of a question bank with over 8,500 questions, which was one of our main aims of utilizing this. And then the variables then, which include just some of the variables in the data files that were collected. So within the series, then, as I say, there kind of relates back to kind of our statistical sections. We have administrative data there, business statistics, environment and climate, growing up in Ireland, which is our longitudinal survey in Ireland around the children growing up, essentially, labour market analysis and social analysis. So I suppose if we take kind of business statistics for a second, and this is kind of our economic side of things, and we've just created that into different sub-series, so there's kind of more to add to this that is in development. But we can see here then within business statistics, we have a number of repeated studies that is, I suppose, conducted within business statistics. We have kind of information society statistics and enterprises, building construction inquiries, monthly service inquiries, and so on. We kind of even the business COVID surveys and other business statistics were kind of biannual surveys conducted in business statistics. So, for example, within the ICT, we can see that we're trying to, I suppose, populate as much metadata about this particular study as much as we can. So we have the title of what it is, the abstract, the purpose of this particular study, and then the different data collections that reside within Information Society and Enterprises. So this is an annual survey. So we have a collection period for 2021, 2020, 2019, with all the surveys attached. And then as we try and kind of populate as much metadata about the data collections as possible, we have one then for every year. So let's just take kind of ICT Enterprise 2020. So this is kind of what our surveys look like, and I suppose by using I suppose collecting for ourselves, but with DDI as well. One of the key things is around kind of the versioning of, okay, the 6 versions of that, when it was last updated, what the rationale of the change was, and then to dig deeper, I suppose, into each of the revisions, so we can kind of go back to any of the changes if we so wish. But I suppose just making it very easy for researchers and users to see the questions that are asked, and most importantly, kind of capturing as much information about the questions as we can. So each of the question blocks and then the questions that reside within that. And I suppose just kind of capturing information around the name, the label, the question text. I suppose one of the key things here is we try not to hard code years to enable reusability and standardization. So we use the kind of use of dynamic text enclosed in curly brackets. And then I suppose with this question in particular, then we can see that the exact same question was used across the 3 surveys. So, oh, sugar, I have to come completely back on that. That's what I get for live demo. So then within the kind of the metadata packages, then again enable us to kind of produce more metadata around the instrument itself. So kind of related documentation, so it enables kind of people to download a cleaner kind of paper form of the survey that they're working on. So I'll output paper form example of this, so for the statisticians, for field staff who require it. And then our concept schemes then, so around definitions of some of the concepts that are used within the survey. And I suppose one of the key things that we're trying to do is push the standardization of these as well. So for example, around the use of internet, so we have our definition of what internet is, and we can see then the questions in which this particular concept was asked. So the number of employees with web access and the number of employees using computer with internet. So with that, then I suppose we can see that although it's the same definition that's used in terms of this concept, if there are actually different questions that they're asked in. So for example, the number of persons employed with internet access for business purposes, with the concept of internet, and then it's asked in the 2019 in a different way, but in the same kind of concept. around internet. And I suppose it's been able to kind of standardize and use, I suppose, the same definitions, even if it is different questions, but that there's a lot of information, I suppose, detailed there in one place, as opposed to, you know, you'd be weeks kind of finding that in different kind of silos by looking at that. Sorry, I kind of populated these in case anything crashed on me, but anyway. So I suppose in terms of, yes, that was kind of the example on the business statistics. So within, so that's kind of, I suppose, an economic series and study. And then we have our labour market analysis then, which is kind of our main social survey that's conducted quarterly around the unemployment, employment statistics of Ireland. So we have these broken into different studies with years, as it's quarterly conducted inside that. So for example, we have Q1 2019, Q2, Q3, and Q4, and then just some very high level summary statistics on some of the data that was collected. I'll keep it at questionnaire design level today, so I won't go into some of them, but again, it's kind of the same look and feel across each of the studies, again broken into different quarters and our metadata packages and with inside that. And I suppose with the main thing of, I suppose, using this as well is just the very kind of complex surveys in this case, with, as you can see with the LFS survey, a number of blocks, which is very kind of complex surveys in terms of filters, in terms of conditions, and the questions that are asked, with a number of them. So, you know, a spec can be nearly 200 pages long in this case. And I suppose it's been able to just see this easily, as well as, again, the use of standardizing content and being able to capture that all in one place. And I've been able to kind of download the PDF and see the different versions of this. So again, 142 versions of this, which is quite complex. So then I suppose the other part of it then is kind of trying to push how we standardize these questions that I mentioned. So for example, in terms of the age question in this case, can you tell me about your age? And we can see that, I suppose, this exact same question is used across many social statistics surveys. So we have the household count that was done for recently during COVID, the SILK surveys, the income, consumption, living conditions survey, and then the all across the LFSs. And it's trying to, I suppose, get our questionnaire design unit, and by using this platform and using EDDI, it makes it quite easy for them to do, to see what questions are already in the question bank, and then to reuse these over time, making it easier for respondents and for the interviewer as well on the field. And it's the same kind of logic, I suppose, around like the first name of a respondent, that this is the standard of which may we ask your first name, and that's a standard across particular questions. It's used, I suppose, a lot more, but the version had to change because of data collection modes. But I suppose it's just kind of the same kind of logic across other questions, but the level of metadata as well that we can actually capture by using the standard, I suppose, around Blaze instructions, which is specific for our IT department. So, you know, add the screen note in blue around Catty and Cappy, allow the don't know, move to the next question for age to be entered. So there's such enriched, I suppose, level of data for our IT as well. So they're heavily dependent on it for questionnaire specs when designing the surveys. So the spec that, I suppose, is produced from Eclectica in this case is kind of gospel for them when designing it, because if your interviewer instructions, the question text, what type of question that it is, and the more we use that then commonly across surveys, it makes it more streamlined and easier for kind of all involved. And that kind of same,
have 5 more minutes.
Perfect, thank you. With our code list as well. So there's just an example where a code list is used. So for example, can you confirm that the name is of your age is even, and then the response type of being yes or no. So this then is kind of our standard yes or no response type for yes and no. And really then, I suppose, the standard that if you're asking any yes or no question is that must be used. It's quite a simplistic example, I suppose, but it's just given the context of what we're trying to do, I suppose, with code lists as well, is that if one exists, that you reuse it where possible, so that from a classifications perspective, that if we collected the same at the start, that we can start to be more standardized when we're publishing the tables at the end, obviously for integration, linkage, and so on. So for example, for this particular yes or no, standard yes or no for CSO, It's used across 851 questions. So we can see all the list of the questions here that it's used in. So although they're different questions, they all ask 1 for yes and 2 for no, and that's something that we can stand by with the yes and no as such. And I suppose just kind of some of the other work then is just around kind of grouping questions and creating them into different question sets. So for example, we've kind of a block around introductory questions that are asked across our economic statistics surveys. So like primary activity, year covered, family business. And inside that then we can start to try and see the different questions that are available across the definition of primary activities. Some things are being quite slow to load for me. Um, so just for example, I suppose the main activity of the enterprise and by being able to group these using Collectica for ourselves, we can very easily, I suppose, see what questions are available on main activity of the business so that we can start to identify, okay, these are the questions that already exist. Basically that no more should really be created, but to make it easier for the questionnaire design unit and for statisticians to see, okay, these are what exists, these are where it's used, and kind of using that whole functionality of a question pool and a question repository to enable, standardization, you say main activity enterprise, and these are kind of the questions that exist around this concept of activity of the enterprise. Kind of that kind of work, I suppose, is something you can be doing full time really, but I suppose the value of it in the sense of what you get from linking concepts and variables like that is just is invaluable, I suppose, in terms of metadata. So this kind of a flying demo, but I suppose I just want to finish on some of the maybe the challenges that we've maybe faced throughout our journey. I suppose introducing any kind of new process or standard, I suppose, this kind of results in a change of mindset. And I suppose for ourselves and our statisticians, it went from changing both kind of a new tool and a new standard, and then kind of the whole aspect of that they're no longer designing questions anymore either, or questionnaires. So I suppose going through that transition was probably challenging, I suppose, and it's still kind of new for some people as we go through the cycle. I suppose other things is kind of trying to meet the needs and requirements of our users. With any kind of tool and service that provided, I think people want different things from it, and with different things, like no, we can't do everything. So it's trying to manage them expectations while meeting them halfway as well. Other things then kind of around enforcing governing standards. So obviously there's an awful lot of metadata being ingested into the repository, trying to ensure that these are of best standard and that people are actually reusing what's in there. As we're quite a small team, I suppose that's kind of one of the key challenges around what we do. And then training requirements about people actually understand the concept of DDI and communicating that although we're using Collectica, it's actually built on a standard that exists, and to have a base level of that. As well as kind of integration with other metadata systems, as I suppose some of the systems that we're working with haven't previously, are built on different standards, and trying to get them to be talking to each other as well. So finally, I suppose just to finish up on our future aims. I think if anyone, I feel like I've seen this for quite a while, but one of our intentions is to disseminate a public-facing port, which I'm relieved to say we're at the very, very final stages of this. So what I showed you there is our internal Collectica portal, and then our main intention is to make an external facing one for data users, researchers, and yourselves as DDI users as well. So we're hoping to do this, to launch this very, very early in 2022. So I'd be happy to kind of to share that with you and get any kind of feedback from yourselves as kind of experts of the standard as well on things that we may not have thought of or could improve on. So we also, I suppose, just want to advance our work on data discovery and utilize the other kind of features of DDI and Collectica, such as quality reporting and the production of code books. Obviously, keep incorporating our surveys into Collectica, and then continue standardizing question variables and code lists. Because I think we can never be standardized enough, and I think that's the key kind of thing really. So although we're pushing on, there's a lot more to do. So I suppose thanks so much for everyone for listening. If anyone has any kind of comments or feedback or questions, I'll be happy to take them.